Hello, Book 2. This is Mike Frost, the postmodern poetry prognosticator. I thought today I would do a tag, an African writer's tag from Rashmika, from Rashmika Likes Books. I'll leave a link to the original tag below, the one that she created, and strongly encourage you to visit her website, or YouTube channel. She does not work primarily with poetry, but she does do poetry videos, of which I eagerly anticipate because she's got a wonderful ear for poetry, which she covers more than poetry. So if you're on BookTube and you have not subscribed to her, I strongly suggest you check her out. She will broaden your horizons, I promise you, and she will entertain you as well. She created this tag called the African Writers Tag, and I thought this would be a great month of which to do it in Black History Month here in the United States. She's from South Africa. Rashmika is in South Africa. So I'm going to go through some of these questions that she's put out here. I will tell you from the get-go, I am woefully inadequate to this tag, but I thought if I did it, maybe I could encourage some folks to visit her YouTube channel, which is far better than mine. So if by doing this I can encourage one person to go over to hers that hasn't been to her already, then I will have achieved my goal, because it's certainly not to impress you with my knowledge of African writers. I'm woefully inadequate to that task. So I'll go through the questions that she's written. I'm not going to take them in order because I never do with tags. I don't know why. I just can't seem to take these things in order, but I'll go through the questions. I'll cover every one of them, I promise. So greeting in one of the African languages. So to greet somebody, use one of the African languages. I am familiar with Arabic, so salam alaikum. The Egyptian or Arab North African countries that would qualify for their greetings in an African language. I wish I knew more. Which African country you never heard of before? So she encourages us to look at a map of Africa and figure out a country you hadn't seen or heard of before. And I'm in no way trying to boast here, but geography was one of my favorite things whilst I was in the military traveling through Europe, Middle East, North Africa. So I'm familiar with, but the one that she mentioned that I also found intriguing when I discovered it was I'm talking about years ago, but the Central Republic of Africa. I thought was just a name of an area, but I didn't realize it was an actual country when I first heard of it. So I'd never been there, but that's the one I guess would surprise me that I did not know. Number 3, which African country do you want to read more about? Here I would say Morocco. I've always been fascinated by Morocco, but I haven't read enough about it. So I'm going to have to put that on my TBR, find some books about Morocco. I need to get off the boat on this one, get in there and get in the water and learn a little bit more about Morocco. And Rashmika has got me very interested about South Africa, so I'm going to have to learn more there too. 4, which African country have you read most about? And I think almost every American, maybe even European, would have to say Egypt. We're all familiar with Egyptian history. It has been Angliofied too much, and its influences between European influences and Arab influences has changed it drastically from the African influences of its origins, but we're all familiar with the Egyptian history. I would like to know more about it in its prehistory, but that's an easy answer for me. That's the one I know most about, and I studied it a lot I'd spent probably 10 years of my life, all told, in Turkey. And I studied a lot about the Ottoman Empire. It's one of the fascinating histories that I learned about. But I've read a lot about the Ottoman influences on Egypt and the Egyptian influences on the Ottomans and now modern-day Turkey. 5, which is your favorite African author? I'm going to hold this one. This is not that diaspora writers. This is African writers. I'm going to hold this one to question 9. And get back to that one. So let me. And it says, what is your favorite African diasporic writer? And that's Langston Hughes. Rashmika, I am a big fan of Maya Angelou, but for bodies of work, I'm going to have to stick with my favorite, Langston Hughes. Number 7, what is your least favorite African diasporic writer? And here I bow out of this question somewhat from cowardice and somewhat I don't like to be negative about any writer. Some writers don't appeal to me, but I know that they appeal to some others, and I don't want to taint somebody else's view of a writer. So I don't generally say bad things about writers or their body of work. I might criticize a particular book, but to go after a writer or a body of work, I try to avoid that. So I'm going to avoid that. 8, what genre would you like to see set in Africa? And here she's speaking of fantasy novels, and there are some really great fantasy novels that have come out of African writers. But for me, when you're asking me, I would really love to see some epic poetry. I know that there's epic poets and epic poetry from the African continent, but I've not seen one translated into English that I could read and enjoy. So if anybody knows of any epic poetry, I'm going to, when I go to question 9 and go back to question, I think it was 5, and combine those, I'll talk about the rest of the poetry. Which brings me to question 9. Share a few books on your TBR by African writers. So, going back, and I'm going to combine this with question 5, which is your favorite African writer. I don't really have one. Now, an African writer that I know of and really, really enjoy is Naguib Mahfouz, an Egyptian writer. But I wanted to give a poetry answer to this one, and I really don't have a poetry answer. I have 2 books that I've had for a very long time. This one might interest Rashmika, the Africans Poems in English Translations. This is a book that I would not recommend. Do not recommend to readers. It was published in, let me take a quick look, 1962 was the original publication date. So it's all apartheid type poetry. Well, it's not centered on apartheid, but all the writers that are represented in the history of this Afrikaans poetry is folks that grew up in apartheid South Africa. And it shows in most of them. The first poem, however, is a good one, and it's, and pardon my reading of this, Die Afrikaans Taal, the Afrikaans Language, by J. Lyon Kachet, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it is a poem about the Afrikaans language. He was an advocate for bringing the Afrikaans language, this is the original origins of the Afrikaans language, bring it into mainstream. Just the first stanza, just so you get an idea what I'm talking about. He's talking about the language, so he's using a metaphor here. I am a simple country girl, to most of little worth, but yet I am of noble birth and most exalted birth. From Holland came my dear papa to sunny Africa, from France, where swells the luscious grape, my pretty dear mama. So he's tracing the history of the Afrikaans language, which uses French, but I might have to be corrected on this. I'm not educated enough, but I thought it was between the Dutch and the English languages. It was a combination of those two, but here he's using French. So this is what I got this for was in a library sale years ago. But what I got it for, and I still keep it, even though I don't enjoy most of the poetry in there, is it has the English translation and the original Afrikaans in the original Afrikaans language there. When I get translated poetry, I really like to see both the original in the original language and the translation. Even if I can't read the original in this case, which I cannot do, I cannot read the original. But that is why I still hold on to that book, even though I would not recommend it. It gives me an exposure to the Afrikaans language that I would not otherwise have. The only other anthology that I have is African women's poetry. Now, this one I can recommend. It's got some wonderful poetry in here. Not a large enough sample from any one poet to give me what I could call my favorite African poet. But I can tell you, when I originally got this book years and years ago, there was one that jumped out at me from Albina P.A. Bursia, I think it's the way you pronounce it, Ghana poet. And it's called Liberation. And why it stuck out to me is I read it now. This is a woman who was raised in Ghana. It could have been written by any African-American female poet as well. And it brought home to me, I remember when I read it originally, it brought home to me this idea that it's not, how best to put this, it's not just African-American or the diasporic writers that have suffered a great deal at the hands of both whites and men in general. There's a suffering everywhere, I guess, is the way to put it. But let me read the poem, and then you can maybe get the same vibe I got. Written by a woman of Ghana. It was published in 1983. And it's called Liberation. We are all mothers, and we have that fire within us of powerful women whose spirits are so angry we can laugh beauty into life and still make you taste the salty tears of our knowledge. For we are not tortured anymore. We have seen beyond your lies and disguises, and we have mastered the language of words. We have mastered speech. And no, we have also seen ourselves raw and naked piece by piece until our flesh lies flayed with the blood of our own hands. What terrible things can you do to us which we have not done to ourselves? What can you tell us which we didn't deceive ourselves with a long time ago? You cannot know how long we cried until we laughed over the broken pieces of our own dreams. Ignorance shattered us into such fragments we had to unearth ourselves piece by piece to recover with our own hands such unexpected relics. Even we wondered how we could hold such treasure. Yes, we have conceived to forge our mutilated hopes into the substance of visions beyond your imaginings, to declare the pain of our own deliverance. So do not ask what it is we are laboring with this time. Dreamers remember their dreams when they are disturbed, and you shall not escape what we will make of the broken pieces of our lives. An African writer, but I could have read that and believed it came from an African-American writer, or a British, African-British writer, or a Jamaican writer, or any part of the diaspora. The other poem that's in here, Ingrid Jonker is in here. Jonker. And this is one of Rashmika's favorite poems. And I will not try to read it here, but I am going to link below to The Child Who Was Shot Dead by Soldiers in Nyanga. Please click on Rashmika's reading of this poem and her explanation of this poem below. Extremely important. And it will show you, as it showed me, her wonderful ear for poetry. The other part of that question, not to move too quickly, but please click on that link below. The other part of that question is the TBR. So obviously I'm woefully inadequate in my education of African poets. I'm more familiar with Chinese, Turkish poets, European poets, South and Central American poets. But this tag, and why I did it, was it exposed my ignorance, and I got to fix that. So as soon as I saw her tag, I went to find poetry that I could expand my own awareness of African poets. And I've already ordered this out of Amazon. It comes out on May 7th in 2019. the New Generation's African Poets box set. It's a box set of chapbooks of different African poets. So I put a reminder there to order the 2018 box set. So between the two of them, I think there's like 18 to 20 chapbooks in these boxes that will be from different poets to the African continent. And if I get them in May, then I will have them in time for June 16th, which I think is Youth Day in South Africa. And I'm hoping Rashmika has some sort of read through or some tag or something to bring us all to the awareness of Youth Day in South Africa. And it also comes just a few days before what we call Juneteenth here in the United States. So it would be, I think, a good time for me to go through those. May to June would give me enough time to go through all of those chapbooks and be able to better communicate something about African poetry and African poets, in translation at least. But if you want it from the source, if you want real knowledge of African poets, Rashmika is the place to start. So I encourage you again to go down to her website. And the last part of the tag is to tag some other folks. So I will be tagging some folks in the comments section. In the meantime, have a great day, BookTube, and click on the link below. It's much better than my video. Bye, BookTube.